The title of today's talk is called The Cognitive Foundations of Spiritual Experiences in Chinese World of Warcraft, 魔兽世界. And I am research faculty at a school of psychology, but I'm actually an anthropologist, and most of my work, I've done a lot of work with Chinese young adults who spend extensive amounts of time in video games. And what I want to talk about today is the role of a video game in manifesting spiritual experiences, or what the Chinese players say are spiritual experiences. And I am going to at times read straight off of the teleprompter. Apologies in advance. Okay, what we got here? All right, and I'll get to the central research question here in just a moment. But let me back up and give some background here. In the first half of this talk, I'm going to talk about spiritual experiences, Jingshan experiences. And the Chinese World of Warcraft players claim to have while they play the game as a normal part of gameplay. Okay, they're not going in there operationalizing Buddhist ideologies or Christian ideologies. These seem to be spontaneous events. They report that they're spontaneous. They say, I'm playing, it just happens. And what do I mean by spiritual experiences? I'm going to cheat here a little bit and impose an interpretation on you. Okay, I have argued elsewhere that most of these experiences meet criteria that the French sociologist Emile Durkheim, who's this gentleman, Victorian era gentleman up here on the right, has called collective effervescence. Okay, in previous work I've connected to these experiences to collective effervescence, and I don't have much time here to establish this connection today. And the connection I don't think will be obvious from the quotes I'm going to present. So I'm just going to ask you to humor me because it's my birthday and go with me on this, okay? And the only reason I bring this up here, the only reason I'm even telling you about work that exists somewhere out there is because I consider what these players report they have to be a religious experience of sorts, okay? So, and you can beat me up about definitions about what is or isn't a religion later, but just for today, next 30 minutes, if you just humor me on this, that would be good. And so the big question is, how did we get here? Okay, how did we get here? What are some of the causal factors that resulted in the emergence of religious phenomena from a video game that has no religious content, no overt religious content, that is being played by players who 89% of them say are not themselves religious, okay? So if this is collective effervescence or something like that, how did this happen? Okay, what were the factors leading up to this? And in previous work, I have identified a number of factors that correlate with players who claim to have these experiences. Okay, so Chinese young adults, mostly between 19 and 25, who claim both a sense of moral certainty about their lives. They say, I have a strong moral identity, I know what I want, I know what good is, I know what bad is. And also players who report having extreme moral confusion, what Durkheim would have called anomie. They say, well, China's changing so quickly, my parents say this, my teachers say that, my friends say this, I don't even really know. People who report strong levels of moral confusion and people who report high levels of moral certainty both correlate with these experiences. People who experience pressure to stop playing also correlate with these experiences. So some of these young adults, their parents tell them you shouldn't be playing that game. They're sensitive to media, calling into question the moral worth of the game, suggesting that the game is opium, electronic opium, that it's bad for people. And people who players who endure what Durkheim called fatalistic pressures. And that's kind of a bit of a strange word in today's parlance, but by fatalistic, he meant people who their daily lives are very restricted, okay, they can't move around a lot. So in China today, this would be high school students, right? You're in class from like 8 a.m. till 9 p.m. You don't have a lot of opportunities to go out and play basketball or hang out with your friends. You're just kind of stuck. This is what Durkheim would have called a fatalistic pressure. And he thought this made people have a strong need for moral expression because he believed that we had these strong intuitions for moral expression and that we needed to kind of exercise them. And sure enough, players who report being confined to a small radius of space on a daily basis also report these. But today's research is not about any of that. Today's research is about the game itself. And what role does the game itself play in manifesting these experiences? Why is the game good for these experiences? How do game and mind interact in a way that generates these experiences? So these first factors, I believe, are creating a need or a vacuum for these experiences. How does the game deliver? How does the game provide those? So here's the central research question underlying today's talk. What formal properties of the game world, the 魔兽世界 game world, and which cognitive mechanisms are interacting to create in-game spiritual experiences? And finally, that's the central research question. So what? Why does any of this matter? What should we care about these fancy interpretations of experiences in video games? Well, I believe that altogether this research enables us to put together a model of the emergence of collective effervescence. So a lot of CSR theorizing is focused on origins of human religiosity. How did this start? 20,000 years ago when we start seeing evidence of afterlife beliefs and these types of things. How did that start? As scientists, we like to directly observe things, but we can't go back 20,000 years and figure out how this group of people started doing this activity that we describe today as collective effervescence. But when we see something like this just kind of emerge from largely secular materials, this game is only 10 years old. If we can identify some of the causal factors that went into this, we could make a model of emergence for how this got off the ground, and that could lead to testable hypotheses. We could have I don't want to be facetious, we could have a recipe for collective effervescence. And so today's talk is looking at what role does this game play in that recipe. And so with that extended preface, today's talk proceeds as follows. I'll just quickly introduce 魔兽世界 for those of you who have no idea what it is. And I only have 2 examples of spiritual experiences on the slides today. I'm going to connect these to moral foundations theory. There's 2 psychologists named Jonathan Haidt and Craig Joseph, who argue that all human minds have these cognitive mechanisms dedicated to certain types of moral cognition. I'm going to argue that certain aspects of the game world are activating these mechanisms, and that the outputs from these mechanisms are informing or a part of these spiritual experiences. And then I've broken this down into 2 hypotheses to test this. And I'm going to present survey data from 545 Chinese World of Warcraft players that is pretty supportive, not 100%. Oops, okay, so World of Warcraft, it's an online video game designed by a company called Blizzard, and they're in California. And sorry, I don't know why those colors aren't manifesting. It's a difficult game to summarize in just a few minutes. It's very complex. Try to boil it down to a few gameplay imperatives. The big thing is to team up with your friends and go do raid dungeons. And you get together in these groups of 5 or 10 or 25, and you have to run through all these dungeons, killing dragons, and then everyone has to contribute. Everyone has a role, and that's kind of the marquee gameplay for 魔兽世界. When you enter the game, you have to pick one of 2 sides. You can either be Alliance on the left or Horde, and you're a member of one of these factions, and you have to run around kind of trying to kill members of the other faction. All right, and when you achieve the game's marquee end game objectives, you can get this wonderfully ostentatious, huge, epic gear, swords and helmets and horses, and this might take 6 months to get. Okay, so these actually have real powerful social value within the game. If you're walking around with this sword, and this sword is called Blessed Thunder Fury, Blessed something of the Windseeker, and it was extremely hard to get. And so this guy will walk around with this and just, everyone will say, wow, that's really great. And so this is another appeal of gameplay, is getting this epic stuff. And just exploring. So I have been kind of casually playing this game since 2007. Now, because I'm an academic, I really don't have that much time. So I've only seen about 70% of the game world. But it is absolutely massive, and a lot of people really enjoy just walking around and exploring it. It is a beautiful place. And then just hanging out. People just go in to hang out with their friends. For a while back around 2009, 2010, there was a trend of real world couples getting married in the game, and this is a wedding, okay, unless that wasn't obvious. Someone here has gotten married. But there's all sorts of things you can do in this game. I had a housemate when I was a student at Oxford. She was a Norwegian girl, and she went into World of Warcraft every single night to pick flowers and fish. And so the game has many offerings. This is a big, complicated world. There's a lot to do. But this is just kind of a very basic introduction. And so for my PhD field work, I spent about 15 months at Wuhan and kind of living with these players who were spending 40, 50 hours a week in the game. And I was trying to develop causal perspectives on gameplay. Just as a lot of the research today is focused on kind of explaining religion, I was trying to explain play. How does the game and mind interact in a way that just kind of grabs our minds and makes us so interested in this game? What's going on? How does it do that? And I was also interested in how the experiences they had in the game, how they were contextualizing them within their offline lives in contemporary urban China. And anyway, by today, I've interviewed, surveyed, or collected testimonials from a couple thousand players. And Dr. Bond just said, in my beginning is my end, and I agree with that in most circumstances, but I kind of set out to study this game with highly influenced by Western media describing the effects of video games on aggression. I was expecting these games to see people who spent long amounts of time in these games to show elevated levels of a sense of personal agency, of control, of behaviors that we associate with kind of anger and that type of thing. And so I was very struck from the beginning by the large number of players that claim to have deep spiritual experiences when they play the game, and they attribute deep moral significance to gameplay. So here's a testimonial from a player that's kind of typical of these responses. Here we go. WoW has given me a spiritual feast. I haven't had teamwork for a long time. It is so much more than the teamwork allowed in very limited circumstances. WoW emphasizes unconditional loyalty and friendship. WoW to me is a long spiritual odyssey. I just have to keep walking. I should keep walking. And these discussions of in-game spirituality, they often featured a description of merger with the game world. So they talked about their soul going into the game, or they talked about being one with the game, or they talked about a sense of dissolved boundaries between themselves and the game. Okay, but by far the most reliable common denominator across all the spiritual experiences is a deep sense of moral significance attributed to gameplay. These are always deeply moral experiences of compassion, or a feeling of justice, or just a feeling of satisfaction of becoming a better person. Okay. Game is a very powerful source of these emotions, much more powerful than real life or reality, as players call it. You can get a lot of spiritual encouragement in WoW that you could never get in reality. This might be the essence of the game. WoW players have the spirit of teamwork, modesty, and harmonious communication that only exists in movies and cannot be found in real society. Okay, so what are these spiritual experiences? And they're not homogenous. They report kind of different types, but moral emotions and feelings are not comprehensive of these in-game spiritual experiences, but they are a very stable feature of them. They occur in all of them. So to explain why the game was such a strong facilitator for spiritual experiences, I thought a good place to start would be to explain how is it a strong facilitator of moral experiences? Why is it so good at eliciting compassion, a sense of justice, a sense of positive leadership, and these types of things? Okay. And one possible reason that I've become pretty attached to is the idea that this game is packed with stimuli that have a high competence in activating these cognitive mechanisms dedicated to moral cognition. Okay, so there are two psychologists, Jonathan Haidt and Craig Joseph. Some of you might have heard of them. They have something called moral foundations theory, and they argue that all human minds possess 5 cognitive mechanisms, one each dedicated to caring, dedicated to assessing what is a fair exchange, what's fair, what's not fair, tit for tat type reasoning, the value of group loyalty, how to detect and respond to authority. You know, we have all primates seem to have this system. They know who's in charge, they know how they should react, and they know when they're in charge, and they know how they can act towards others. And a system that Justin discussed earlier, purity, the need to keep some things free of contaminants, the need to keep some things separate from other things. And I'm just going to give an example of one of these that factors into the survey. Let me just talk a little bit about this CARE foundation. So Haidt and Joseph argue that we have these because these cognitive mechanisms would have solved evolutionarily recurrent problems that we faced in our ancestral past, okay? Forgot about that slide. One of them is mammals, you know, we're mammals, and our babies, all mammalian babies, are, you know, very helpless. They need a lot of help, they need a lot of care. If they're going to survive, if they're going to live to be old enough to reproduce, and our genes, you know, will be expressed in the succeeding generations. So parents have to have mechanisms, they have to have some sort of mental system that's capable of detecting suffering in children, noticing when they're crying or they're in pain or they're upset, and this, it needs to be able to detect vulnerability, and then it has to respond in ways that help us to help the child. So we get a feeling, this CARE system, it can be activated by a number of different things. Haidt and Joseph discuss a CARE system. One thing that's activated is like screaming. So infant cries share the same basic acoustic structure as all mammalian cries, or at least most of them. And when we hear crying, there's a tendency, our prolactin levels, I don't think these words are going to translate, we have certain hormones that increase that kind of make us feel a sense of compassion and, oh, you know, I want to help this poor child. There's a lot of work on baby schema, and so these are like big eyes relative to nose and mouth, and there's been a lot of research showing that these activate like kind of reward systems in the mind that approach related reward systems. When we see these cute things, and they don't just have to be, you know, babies, right? Other animals kind of use these as well, and we see them and we think, oh, that's, you know, I want some of that. And digital media, so these would have evolved for babies, but they can be activated by other things. They can be activated by dogs, but digital media can just really exaggerate these inputs, right? And so we get, you know, things like this cat, and it works. I mean, we see the cat and we think, you know, oh, but look how big look how much he exaggerates, you know, these same features, right? He's got these big, huge eyes, and that's his big power. When he gets in trouble, if anyone has seen this movie, he just gets in as big as he possibly can. And so we respond to this. We also respond to things like blood, okay? Whenever we see body contortions, bleeding, indicators that someone is vulnerable or in trouble, we have a mechanism that knows that's important, you know, that you've got red stuff coming out of you. Maybe you need some help, okay? All right, okay. Let me just, okay. So I had this idea that one reason Moisho Shijiat might be so good at creating moral experience, like positive moral emotions, is just to stick with this example, just to stick with the CARE Foundation. It is packed with the stuff that should activate these systems, okay? So in this game, everyone is dying, everyone is sick, everyone's bleeding, okay? There are lots of people who need help. And in this conference, when we leave here tonight, are any of us going to see any of that? I mean, you know, well, we hope not, but then again, I would feel really excited if I got to rescue some damsel in distress, you know, or had a good Samaritan moment, but it never happens. There's never anyone lying on the road and I, you know, get to give you a hand. But in this game, it's just nonstop. It's just a nonstop parade of vulnerability, okay? So, I'm not. Let's see if I can. Thank you. It's just fear of supernatural punishment. Okay. So I had this fancy theory, and but is that what's happening? Is this game activating these systems described by Haidt and Joseph? So how to test this? I started going through the game looking for stimuli that might predict the activation of these moral systems. Okay, and I decided on class role. I'll tell you what that is. I decided on class role as a possible predictor. So when you play this game, you have one of three roles to choose from, okay? You can be the healer, and if you're the healer, your job, you're with your team, and it might be 4 other people, or it might be 39 other people, and your job is to, keep an eye on everyone, and when you see someone in trouble, they're bleeding, or wheezing, or compromised somehow, you have to cast spells on them that heal them and bring them back to health, right? This little guy over here, who doesn't have a description because he doesn't factor into the survey, he's what we call DPS. He's damage per second. And his job is just to deal out as much pain as fast as he can, okay? You're right. And finally, you have someone called the tank, okay? And he wears all these big armors. He's got a huge helmet and big shoulder pads and shields or something. And he runs in the front. So when we enter this dungeon, he'll be in the front, and he has all these different abilities to try to make everyone attack him to save the rest of the group. Because this little healer up here, she can only wear clothes like I have, these little soft cotton clothes. And if you hit her or him, they're in a lot of trouble. But the tank wears a lot of armor, so he has to go first and try to convince all the enemies to hit him. Okay, but these are the roles, and we hypothesized that if you're a healer, you're kind of plugged into a different frequency when you play this game. You're looking for these stimuli that should activate the Care Foundation. Okay, you're looking for people who are suffering. You're looking for people who are vulnerable. So we hypothesized that healers should experience greater frequency of Care Foundation activation than non-healers. If this game is activating these systems, this is one way of kind of putting that to the test. And one of the ways we measured this was in this survey. We asked players when they played, how often did they feel these appraisal feeling dyads? How often do you feel a sense of warmth and caring for other players? How often do you feel, I want to help this person, okay? And we hypothesized that tanks should experience greater frequency of authority activation than non-tanks. And I don't have time to go into all the rationale behind this, but I'm happy to talk about it later. And so we asked players also, when you're playing this game, how often do you feel like a quality leader? How often do you feel I demonstrate good leadership in this game? And so we just did an online survey. We had 545 participants. No surprise that 504 were males, 41 were females, and median age was 24. Okay, so the tanks killed it. Tanks scored 2. So when we asked these questions, how often do you feel, compassion? How often do you feel these things? They had a 4-point Likert scale. 1 was, never. 4 was all the time or very frequently. Tanks did experience the authority feelings much more often than non-tanks. 2.31 versus 2.0. A one-tailed t-test revealed this to be significant at p equals 0.012. And the care, it's in blue, even though it's not significant, but it's not significant. He'll fight me on that, but I don't care. Healers did score higher than non-healers, but it only approached significance at p equals 0.08, okay? So, the hypotheses were kind of borne out. The authority was, we got the authority response we expected. We didn't quite get the care response we expected. We did find an interaction with healers between gender and the healer role. Okay. So female healers, this is women who play the game, who play the role, who are healers, score way higher on care scores than male healers. They score way higher than female non-healers, so female tanks, female DPS, and all other non-healers, all P less than 0.001. And yeah, that's, I don't really know how to, there's a lot of different ways you could interpret that. But for the sake of today, I'll just say that I think these results demonstrate that these hypotheses are promising, definitely wanting some nuance. There's clearly plenty of stuff going on here that they're not picking up. But I do think they kind of give preliminary validation to Jonathan Haidt and Craig Joseph's work for investigating why it is this game seems to be so good at creating these deep moral experiences. And what role does this play in collective effervescence? Well, if you have children or young adults who have a strong sense of moral certitude in their lives or a strong sense of moral confusion, you can imagine that to have a place where they can go and just kind of really exercise those feelings of profound moral experience, this is just very appealing to them. I also have other reasons why the fatalistic pressures and what was the other one? The pressure to stop playing the game seem to motivate players to cultivate these experiences, but slowly putting together kind of a little causal model that I feel identifies some underlying factors responsible for the emergence of these experiences. And the role of the game in this is it is full of these stimuli that have a strong capacity to activate moral cognition. So that's my talk. There's so many people to thank. Of course, thanks very much to Templeton World Charity Foundation. Thanks so much to all you guys for coming, not just to this talk, but I've seen most of you at your own universities. And I'm sure Justin will thank her as well, but I also just want to thank Rebecca standing in the back for organizing everything. She's more than anyone else responsible for this conference happening. So I'm just going to pass it over to Justin, who's going to wrap it up here. Oh, sorry, no, yeah, if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to entertain those.